The champagne glass trembled in my hand as I watched my wife Lisa lean into my brother Kevin's embrace across the crowded restaurant, her fingers trailing down his arm in a way that made my stomach clench. They thought I couldn't see them from my position near the kitchen doors of Pine Grove Bistro, hidden behind the decorative screen that separated the dining area from the service corridor. But I saw everything. The way she whispered something that made him laugh, the intimate touch of her hand against his cheek, the kiss that lasted far too long for siblings-in-law. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My security guard uniform felt suddenly suffocating as the reality crashed over me like ice water. Lisa, my wife of 12 years, was having an affair with Kevin, my younger brother whom I'd helped through college, whom I'd lent money to countless times, whom I'd trusted with everything. The same Kevin who'd been coming to our house for Sunday dinners, who'd been my best man at our wedding, who'd looked me in the eye just 3 hours ago and asked how things were going with work. The irony was almost laughable. Here I was, wearing the navy blue uniform of Secure Solutions, complete with the cheap polyester fabric and generic name tag that read R. Thompson, watching my life implode while they celebrated what they thought was my ignorance. If only they knew about the certified letter sitting unopened on my kitchen counter at home, the one bearing the seal of Whitman and Associates, the law firm that had been trying to reach me for 2 weeks about Uncle Harold's estate. The evening had started innocently enough. Lisa had suggested we meet Kevin for dinner at Pine Grove Bistro to celebrate our neighbor Carol's birthday. She'd been acting strange for weeks, taking phone calls in the other room, staying late at her job at the marketing firm, coming home with elaborate explanations for why she'd been delayed. I'd attributed it to work stress, maybe a difficult client or an upcoming presentation. The last thing I'd suspected was that she was planning romantic rendezvous with my own brother. Kevin had arrived first, looking unusually polished in a new suit that must have cost more than I made in 2 weeks of night shifts. He'd hugged me with what I now realized was forced enthusiasm, asking about my job with the kind of condescending sympathy that had become all too familiar over the years. "How's the security gig treating you, Rachel? Still patrolling empty office buildings all night? Maybe it's time to think about something more stable, for Lisa's sake." Lisa had joined us 20 minutes later, apologizing profusely for being delayed at work. "Another client crisis," she'd explained, smoothing down her new dress that I'd never seen before. The fabric looked expensive, far more expensive than anything we could afford on my security guard salary and her entry-level marketing position. She'd kissed my cheek with the perfunctory affection of someone going through the motions, then settled into the seat directly across from Kevin, rather than next to me. The conversation had been painful to endure even before I'd witnessed their secret embrace. They'd talked around me rather than to me, sharing inside jokes and references I didn't understand. Kevin had mentioned a restaurant they'd both apparently visited, describing the amazing seafood selection with an enthusiasm that made Lisa's eyes light up. When I'd asked when they'd gone together, they'd exchanged a quick glance before Kevin explained that he'd simply recommended it to her for a work lunch. The lies came so easily to them, so naturally, that I began to wonder how long this had been going on. How many work lunches had actually been romantic dinners? How many late nights at the office had been spent in hotel rooms? How many times had they laughed about poor naive Rachel, working his overnight shifts while they carried on their affair right under his nose? I'd excused myself to use the restroom, needing a moment to process the growing suspicion that something wasn't right. The way they'd immediately leaned toward each other the moment I'd stood up, the way their conversation had become more animated and intimate, had confirmed my worst fears. Instead of heading to the men's room, I ducked behind the decorative screen that separated the main dining area from the service corridor, positioning myself where I could observe their table unnoticed. That's when I'd seen the kiss. That's when 12 years of marriage had crumbled in the span of 30 seconds. Kevin was saying something that made Lisa throw back her head and laugh, the sound carrying across the restaurant's ambient noise. It was the same laugh she used to reserve for me, back when we were dating, back when she'd look at me like I was the most interesting person in the world, instead of someone to be pitied and eventually betrayed. Now that laugh belonged to my brother, along with her touches, her smiles, her attention. The worst part wasn't the betrayal itself, though that cut deep enough. The worst part was the context I could piece together from their body language and whispered conversations. They weren't just having an affair, they were planning something. Lisa kept glancing toward the restaurant's entrance as if expecting someone, while Kevin checked his phone repeatedly. There was an air of anticipation about them, a sense that tonight was significant beyond just another secret meeting. I thought about all the times Kevin had offered to help with our finances, suggesting that Lisa deserved better than what I could provide on a security guard's salary. He'd been particularly vocal about it lately, mentioning opportunities at his consulting firm, hinting that Lisa's marketing skills were being wasted at her current job. He could help her advance her career, he'd said. She just needed to be willing to make some changes. Now I understood what those changes involved. My phone buzzed with a text message, and I fumbled to silence it quickly, not wanting to draw attention to my hiding spot. The message was from Derek, my supervisor at Secure Solutions, asking if I could cover an extra shift next weekend. The request should have annoyed me. I was already working 6 nights a week, trying to save money for the house repairs Lisa had been requesting, but instead it struck me as absurdly fitting. Even my job was conspiring to keep me away from home, giving them more opportunities to carry on their affair. Lisa was showing Kevin something on her phone now, both of them leaning close to examine the screen. From my position, I couldn't see what they were looking at, but Kevin's reaction was telling. His eyebrows shot up, and he said something that made Lisa nod emphatically. She reached across the table to squeeze his hand, and he brought her fingers to his lips for a brief kiss. The casual intimacy of the gesture hit me harder than the more passionate kiss I'd witnessed earlier. This wasn't just physical attraction or a momentary lapse in judgment. This was a relationship, complete with inside jokes, shared plans, and the comfortable affection that develops between two people who've been together for a while. They'd built something together while systematically dismantling my marriage. I pulled out my own phone and opened the camera app, my hands shaking slightly as I tried to frame the shot. Part of me recoiled at the idea of documenting this moment, of creating permanent evidence of my wife's betrayal, but another part of me knew I'd need proof. Lisa was smart, manipulative when she needed to be. If I confronted her without evidence, she'd find a way to turn it around, to make me question what I'd seen, to paint me as the paranoid, jealous husband who was imagining things because of work stress. The photo came out blurry. My hands were trembling too much to hold the phone steady, but it clearly showed Lisa and Kevin in their intimate embrace. I took several more, each one a nail in the coffin of my marriage, each one proof that the woman I'd loved and trusted for 12 years had chosen my brother over me. Kevin was talking more animatedly now, gesturing with his wine glass as he described something that had Lisa hanging on every word. She was looking at him the way she used to look at me during our early dating years, with complete focus and obvious attraction. When had she stopped looking at me that way? When had I become invisible to her, someone to be tolerated rather than desired? The answer came to me with painful clarity, around the time I'd taken the security job. Lisa had initially been supportive, understanding that it was temporary while I looked for something better in my field. But as months turned into years, as the better opportunities failed to materialize, her patience had worn thin. She'd started making comments about other couples our age, how they were buying houses and taking vacations while we counted every penny. She'd suggested I go back to school, learn a trade, do something to improve our situation. Kevin, meanwhile, had been steadily advancing in his career at the consulting firm. He'd bought a condo downtown, traded in his old car for a BMW, started wearing expensive suits, and talking about investment portfolios. The contrast between us had become impossible to ignore, and apparently impossible for Lisa to resist. I realized they were preparing to leave. Kevin was signaling the waiter for the check while Lisa gathered her purse and coat. They were moving with the synchronized efficiency of a couple who'd done this many times before, each knowing their role in the choreography of deception. Kevin would pay the bill, probably with the credit card he'd mentioned getting a limit increase on, and then they'd leave separately to avoid being seen together. Lisa would drive home to me with some excuse about Carol's birthday running late, while Kevin would go wherever it was they planned to continue their evening. The waiter approached their table with the bill, and I watched Kevin pull out his wallet without hesitation. The gesture was smooth, automatic, the behavior of someone who was used to paying for expensive dinners for two. How many times had he picked up the tab for their secret meetings? How many romantic evenings had he funded while I worked overnight shifts to pay for groceries and utilities? Lisa was touching up her lipstick in her compact mirror, the same shade of red she'd worn on our wedding day. The irony wasn't lost on me. She was preparing to come home to her husband, after spending the evening with her lover, using the same lipstick she'd chosen to symbolize her commitment to our marriage. Kevin stood up first, and they embraced again, this time more carefully, more aware of their surroundings. But I could still see the longing in the way they held each other, the reluctance to separate. Kevin whispered something in Lisa's ear that made her smile and nod, then kissed her forehead with tender familiarity. They were planning something specific, something that required coordination and timing. The way they'd been checking their phones, the anticipatory energy between them, the careful attention to who might be watching, it all suggested tonight was more than just another affair meeting. Tonight was significant. As they began to move toward the exit, I realized I had a choice to make. I could follow Lisa home, confront her with what I'd seen, demand explanations and apologies and promises that things would change. Or I could give them enough rope to hang themselves, let their deception play out, while I gathered more evidence and figured out my next move. The letter from the law firm flashed through my mind again. Uncle Harold's estate. The uncle I'd barely known, my father's brother who'd moved to Montana decades ago, and made a fortune in mining investments. The uncle who'd apparently remembered me in his will despite our limited relationship. The letter I'd been too busy with work, and too focused on saving my failing marriage to bother opening. Maybe it was time to see what Uncle Harold had left me. Maybe it was time to discover what other secrets were waiting to be revealed.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
As I watched my wife and brother leave the restaurant separately, maintaining their careful charade, I realized that some secrets were worth keeping until the moment was right to use them. The evening was far from over, and neither Lisa nor Kevin had any idea that the quiet, struggling security guard they'd been deceiving was about to learn something that would change everything. The drive home felt like navigating through thick fog, every familiar street corner, and traffic light blurred by the weight of what I'd witnessed. My hands gripped the steering wheel of my 10-year-old Honda Civic, the worn leather steering wheel, cover a stark reminder of how different my life had become from Kevin's BMW lifestyle. The radio played some cheerful pop song that felt obscenely inappropriate for the moment, so I switched it off, letting the silence fill the car with my racing thoughts. Lisa's silver Camry wasn't in our driveway when I pulled up to our modest two-story house in the Lakewood neighborhood. The absence of her car should have been a relief, more time to process, to plan, to figure out what came next, but instead it felt like another betrayal. She was probably still with Kevin, extending their evening together, while I drove home alone to face the wreckage of our marriage. The house looked exactly as I'd left it that morning, newspapers still scattered on the front porch from my rushed departure to work, the porch light flickering in that annoying way I'd been meaning to fix for months. The small patch of dead grass, by the mailbox that Lisa had been nagging me to reseed. Everything appeared normal from the outside, a perfect suburban facade, hiding the chaos that had erupted in our lives. I sat in my car for several minutes, engine ticking as it cooled, watching the windows of our home for any sign of movement. The living room was dark, but I could see the blue glow of the television we'd left on for the cats. Such a mundane detail, remembering to leave entertainment for our pets, when our marriage was disintegrating behind the scenes. The key turned easily in the front door lock, the same lock Kevin had helped me install 3 years ago, when we'd had a break-in scare in the neighborhood. He'd insisted on the expensive deadbolt system, claiming he wanted his sister-in-law to feel safe when I was working nights. The memory felt poisoned now, tainted by the knowledge that he'd been planning to betray me even then, perhaps already laying the groundwork for his seduction of my wife. Inside the house felt different somehow, as if the affair had changed the very atmosphere of our shared space. The family photos lining the hallway seemed to mock me, images of Lisa and me on our wedding day, vacation pictures with Kevin and his ex-girlfriend, from 2 years ago, holiday gatherings where we'd all played the role of one big happy family. How long had Kevin been looking at Lisa differently during those family events? How long had she been looking back? The letter from Whitman and Associates sat exactly where I'd left it on the kitchen counter, propped against the ceramic cookie jar Lisa's mother had given us for our 5th anniversary. The envelope was thick, official-looking, with the kind of heavy paper stock that suggested serious legal business. I'd been putting off opening it for 2 weeks, too exhausted from my night shifts, and too focused on trying to reconnect with Lisa to deal with what I'd assumed was probably just paperwork related to Uncle Harold's funeral arrangements. Uncle Harold. My father's younger brother, who'd moved to Montana in the 1980s, and made what the family whispered was a considerable fortune in mining investments and real estate speculation. He'd been something of a mystery, sending Christmas cards with brief notes, but rarely visiting, living what seemed like a solitary life in a cabin outside Billings. The family had lost touch with him over the years, and his sudden death from a heart attack 6 months ago had come as a shock to everyone. I'd driven to Montana for the funeral, a sparsely attended affair in a small church where Harold had apparently been a regular attendee despite his reclusive reputation. The lawyer, an elderly man named Whitman, had mentioned something about Harold's will, but I'd been too grief-stricken and overwhelmed by the travel logistics to pay much attention. Harold had been one of the few family members who'd never judged my career choices, who'd sent encouraging notes during my job search, who'd seemed to understand that sometimes life didn't go according to plan. Now standing in my kitchen, with my marriage in ruins, and my wife presumably still entangled with my brother, I finally felt ready to face whatever message Harold had left behind. The envelope opened cleanly, revealing several pages of legal documents, and a handwritten letter on Harold's personal stationery. The letter was dated just 3 weeks before his death, written in the careful script of someone who'd taken time to choose his words deliberately. "Dear Rachel," the letter began, "if you're reading this, then I've finally kicked the bucket, and Whitman has tracked you down with the paperwork. I hope you're doing well, and that life has been treating you better than it treated me in my younger years. I know we didn't keep in close touch, but I've been following your situation through your father's Christmas letters more than you might think." I paused, remembering the dutiful holiday updates my father sent to various relatives each year, complete with awkward summaries of his children's lives. He'd probably mentioned my job struggles, my marriage, my financial difficulties with the same matter-of-fact tone he used to describe the weather or his garden. "I wanted you to know that I've always admired your persistence and integrity, even when things got tough. Your father mentioned that you'd been having some financial difficulties, working night shifts to make ends meet, and that your wife has been encouraging you to find something more lucrative. I've been there, Rachel. I know what it's like to feel like you're not measuring up to other people's expectations." The words hit closer to home than I'd expected. Harold had understood something about my situation that even I hadn't fully articulated to myself. The constant pressure to be more successful, to provide better, to somehow transform myself into the kind of man who could afford expensive dinners and luxury cars, and spontaneous vacations. "Here's the thing about expectations," the letter continued. "Most of the time they're based on other people's fears and insecurities, rather than any real understanding of what makes a person valuable. I spent too many years trying to prove myself to people who would never be satisfied no matter what I achieved. Don't make the same mistake I did." I glanced at the legal documents, trying to make sense of the complex language and numerical figures. There were references to mining rights, real estate holdings, investment portfolios, and something called the Harold Thompson Trust. The numbers seemed impossibly large, followed by so many zeros, that I had to count them twice to make sure I was reading correctly. "I've left you the bulk of my estate," Harold's letter explained, "not because you need it most, or because you deserve it more than anyone else, but because I believe you'll use it wisely. You've never been motivated by greed or status, and that's exactly the kind of person who should have access to serious money. The lawyers will explain all the details, but the short version is that you're now worth approximately $8.7 million. I had to sit down. The kitchen chair creaked under my weight as I sank into it, the letter trembling in my hands. $8.7 million. The number seemed abstract, impossible, like something from a movie rather than my actual life. I read the sentence 3 more times, each repetition making it feel slightly more real and completely more overwhelming. "I know this probably comes as a shock," Harold continued, "and I know you'll be tempted to tell everyone immediately. My advice is to take your time. Money has a way of changing how people see you, and not always for the better. Figure out who you really are, and what you really want, before you let this inheritance change your relationships." The irony was staggering. While I'd been working night shifts as a security guard, feeling inadequate and financially stressed, Harold had been quietly arranging to make me a multimillionaire. While Lisa had been growing distant and critical of our financial situation, I'd had access to more money than either of us could spend in several lifetimes. While Kevin had been flaunting his consulting firm's success and suggesting I needed to improve my career prospects, I'd been sitting on a fortune that dwarfed his annual salary. But Harold's warning about money changing relationships echoed in my mind as I thought about what I'd witnessed at the restaurant. Lisa and Kevin had made their choices based on who they thought I was, a struggling security guard with limited prospects and dwindling ambition. They'd decided I wasn't worth their loyalty or respect, based on my apparent financial status and career trajectory. Now I had to decide what to do with the truth. The inheritance was legally mine, documented and verified by one of Montana's most respected law firms. I could walk into any bank tomorrow, present the paperwork, and gain access to accounts containing more money than I'd ever imagined having. I could quit my security job, buy a mansion, purchase luxury cars, travel the world, do anything I wanted. But I could also wait. I could let Lisa and Kevin continue their affair, continue their assumption that I was financially desperate and emotionally defeated. I could gather more evidence of their betrayal, while they remained oblivious to the fact that their primary justification for betraying me, my supposed failure as a provider, was based on completely false information. The legal documents included contact information for Whitman and Associates, along with instructions for accessing the various accounts and investments Harold had left behind. There were also references to real estate holdings in Montana, Colorado, and California that I'd apparently inherited along with the liquid assets. Harold hadn't just left me money, he'd left me an entire business empire that I'd had no idea existed. My phone buzzed with a text message from Lisa. "Carol's party running late. Don't wait up. Love you." The casual lie, delivered with such practiced ease, made my stomach turn. She was probably texting me from Kevin's condo, or from whatever hotel room they'd moved to for the rest of their evening together. The "love you" felt like the cruelest part of the deception. 2 words that had once meant everything to me, now reduced to punctuation for her lies. I typed back, "No problem. I'm tired anyway. See you in the morning." Let her think I was going to bed early, exhausted from another night shift. Let her believe she was safely deceiving the naive husband who trusted her completely. Tomorrow I'd call Whitman and Associates and begin the process of claiming my inheritance. Tonight I'd process the magnitude of what had changed in my life in the span of a few hours. The cats, Pepper and Salt, emerged from wherever they'd been napping and began their evening routine of demanding attention and treats. Their simple, uncomplicated affection felt like a relief after the emotional chaos of the day. They didn't care about my job title or bank account balance, or whether I was successful enough to deserve love and loyalty. They just wanted food and scratches behind their ears. As I opened a can of their favorite salmon pate, I realized that Harold's inheritance had given me something more valuable than money: perspective. For months I'd been internalizing Lisa's growing dissatisfaction with our financial situation, accepting her subtle criticisms and Kevin's condescending advice as valid assessments of my worth as a husband and provider. I'd been measuring myself against their expectations and finding myself lacking, but their expectations had been based on incomplete information. They judged me harshly while being completely unaware of the resources that had been available to me all along. Their betrayal wasn't justified by my financial struggles because those struggles had been temporary and, as it turned out, completely unnecessary. The inheritance also gave me options I hadn't had that morning. I could afford the best divorce attorney in Denver. I could document their affair thoroughly and professionally. I could ensure that any settlement would be based on accurate financial information rather than the false picture of desperation they'd been operating under. But more than that, I could choose the timing and manner of these revelations. Lisa and Kevin had made their choices based on who they thought I was. Now I could decide when and how to show them who I actually was. I spent the next 2 hours reading through Harold's legal documents more carefully, beginning to understand the scope of what he'd left behind. The mining rights alone were worth millions, generating steady income from operations I'd never heard of. The real estate holdings included commercial properties in downtown Denver, vacation rentals in Aspen, and undeveloped land throughout the mountain regions that had been appreciating rapidly. Harold had been far more than the eccentric recluse the family had imagined. He'd been a sophisticated investor with a diverse portfolio and a keen understanding of long-term wealth building. The trust he'd established included provisions for ongoing management of the assets, meaning I wouldn't need to become a financial expert overnight to maintain and grow the inheritance. By the time I heard Lisa's car in the driveway, I'd made my decision. I would keep the inheritance secret for now, continue working my security shifts, and observe how Lisa and Kevin's affair developed. I would gather evidence of their betrayal while they remained convinced that they were deceiving a financially desperate man with no options and no power. The front door opened quietly, and I heard Lisa's careful footsteps in the hallway as she tried not to wake me. She was probably checking to see if lights were on, if I was still awake, if she needed to prepare any additional lies about her evening with Carol. I quickly gathered Harold's letter and the legal documents, folding them carefully and tucking them into my work bag where Lisa would never think to look. Then I turned off the kitchen light and headed upstairs, making enough noise that she'd know I was awake, but not so much that she'd feel obligated to engage in conversation about her fictional evening. "Rachel," she called softly from the bottom of the stairs. "How was work?" "Fine," I called back, my voice carefully neutral. "How was Carol's party?" "Oh, you know how she gets. Wanted everyone to stay for cake and coffee. I couldn't get away." Another lie delivered with the same casual ease as her text message. I wondered if she'd rehearsed this conversation with Kevin, if they'd worked out the details of her cover story together. "I'm going to shower and head to bed," I said. "Early shift tomorrow." "Okay, honey. Sleep well." The endearment felt like a slap, another casual cruelty in the growing catalog of her deceptions. But as I stood under the hot water in our shower, I realized that her betrayal had freed me from something I hadn't even recognized as a burden. For months I'd been trying to become the man Lisa wanted me to be, accepting her dissatisfaction as motivation to somehow transform myself into someone more successful, more ambitious, more worthy of her respect. Now I knew that her dissatisfaction had never been about my actual worth or potential. It had been about her own desires and Kevin's manipulation, about opportunities for deception and justifications for betrayal. She hadn't fallen out of love with the real me. She'd never really known who the real me was. Tomorrow I would begin the process of claiming Harold's inheritance and planning my response to their affair. But tonight, for the first time in months, I fell asleep without worrying about whether I was good enough for my wife. I had bigger concerns now, and better options than I'd ever imagined possible. The next 3 weeks passed in a surreal blur of double lives and careful deception. Each morning, I'd wake up next to Lisa as she prepared for another day at the marketing firm, watching her apply makeup with the same routine precision she'd used for 12 years of marriage. She'd kiss my cheek goodbye with mechanical affection, wish me a good day at work, and drive off to what I now knew included regular meetings with my brother. I'd established a new routine of my own. After Lisa left for work, I'd spend 2 hours on the phone with Harold's legal team, learning about investment portfolios and property management and tax implications that would have been completely foreign to me just a month ago. Then I'd drive to my security job, put on the same uniform that had become a symbol of my supposed failure, and patrol empty office buildings while mentally calculating the daily returns on my inheritance. The irony was almost amusing. While Lisa grew increasingly impatient with our financial situation and Kevin offered more frequent suggestions about my career prospects, I was quietly becoming wealthier by the day. Harold's investments had been more sophisticated than I'd initially understood, including growth stocks and real estate ventures that continued generating income even after his death. The lawyers estimated my net worth was approaching $9 million and climbing. But the money felt abstract, disconnected from my daily reality of packed lunches and overtime shifts and Lisa's subtle complaints about our inability to afford a vacation this year. The real inheritance Harold had left me was something more valuable than financial security, the clarity to see my marriage and my family relationships without the distortion of desperation. Kevin had started visiting our house more frequently, usually in the evenings when I was at work. Lisa would mention these visits casually, claiming he'd stopped by to drop off something or pick up a tool he'd lent us months ago. The explanations were always plausible, always delivered with the right tone of mild annoyance at his timing, always accompanied by some criticism of his presumption in visiting when I wasn't home. But I'd started paying attention to details I'd previously overlooked. The way Lisa's mood improved dramatically on days when Kevin had visited. The expensive wine bottles that appeared in our refrigerator with explanations about sales at the grocery store. The new lingerie I'd glimpsed in her laundry basket, pieces far more elaborate than anything she'd worn for me in recent months. Most telling were the changes in her physical affection toward me. What had once been natural intimacy had become perfunctory, obligatory, the mechanical responses of someone fulfilling expected duties while her attention and desire were focused elsewhere. She'd touch my shoulder while passing me coffee, but her fingers felt distant, distracted. She'd curl up next to me on the couch while watching television, but her body language suggested tolerance rather than genuine desire for closeness. I'd begun documenting these observations in a notebook I kept locked in my security vehicle, recording dates and times and specific incidents that established a pattern of deception. The process felt both necessary and emotionally devastating, transforming the intimate details of my marriage into evidence for an eventual confrontation. The breakthrough came on a Thursday evening when Lisa announced she'd be working late on a major presentation for a new client. She'd been preparing for this account for weeks, she explained, and tonight was the final push to complete the proposal. She'd probably be at the office until midnight, maybe later, and I shouldn't wait up for her. I'd nodded sympathetically, kissed her goodbye, and watched her drive away in the direction of downtown Denver. Then I'd called in sick to my security job for the first time in 2 years, claiming a sudden onset of flu symptoms that made me unfit for duty. Derek, my supervisor, had been understanding and slightly concerned, offering to arrange coverage for the rest of the week if I needed time to recover. Instead of heading to work, I'd driven to Kevin's downtown condo building and positioned myself in the parking garage where I could observe the entrance without being seen. The wait had been excruciating, filled with the desperate hope that I was wrong, that Lisa really was working late, that my suspicions were the product of paranoia rather than legitimate concern. Lisa's silver Camry had pulled into the visitor parking area at 8:15, exactly 45 minutes after she'd left our house claiming to be heading to her office. I'd watched her walk through the lobby with the confident stride of someone who belonged there, someone who'd made this journey many times before. The confirmation should have been devastating, but instead it felt like relief. The uncertainty that had been eating at me for weeks finally had resolution. My wife was having an affair with my brother, and they were both comfortable enough with their deception to conduct it brazenly in Kevin's own home, while expecting me to be safely occupied at my night shift. I'd waited in the parking garage for 3 hours, long enough to confirm that this wasn't a brief visit or innocent meeting. When Lisa finally emerged at 11:30, her hair slightly disheveled and her lipstick completely gone, she'd driven directly home to maintain the fiction of working late at the office. That night, I'd lain awake next to her as she slept, listening to her breathing and wondering how long they'd been planning this betrayal. Had it started as emotional infidelity and gradually progressed to physical affair? Or had they been lovers from the beginning, using our family dinners and holiday gatherings as opportunities to plan their deception? The next morning brought an unexpected escalation. Lisa had seemed more energetic than usual, almost giddy as she prepared for work. She'd hummed while making coffee, spent extra time on her makeup, and chosen an outfit that was slightly more revealing than her usual professional attire. "I might be late again tonight," she'd announced while gathering her purse and laptop bag. "This new client is really demanding, but if we land the account it could mean a promotion for me." The lie came so easily to her, delivered with such convincing enthusiasm, that I almost admired her skill at deception. She'd learned to use my own hopes for her career advancement as cover for her affair, knowing I'd be supportive of any opportunity that might improve our financial situation. "That's great," I'd replied, injecting appropriate excitement into my voice. "I hope it works out for you." "It will," she'd said with confidence that seemed to extend beyond her fictional client presentation. "I have a really good feeling about how everything is going to turn out." After she'd left, I'd called Whitman and Associates and arranged a video conference with Harold's legal team. The conversation had been illuminating in ways that extended far beyond financial planning. The lawyers had explained that Harold's inheritance included not just liquid assets and real estate, but also a controlling interest in several business ventures that I could leverage for ongoing income and influence. One of those businesses was a commercial real estate company that owned several office buildings in downtown Denver, including the building where Kevin's consulting firm leased their offices. Another was an investment fund that had been quietly acquiring shares in various local companies, including the marketing firm where Lisa worked. The implications were staggering. Without realizing it, I'd become Kevin's landlord, and Lisa's indirect employer. The very careers they'd been using to justify their superiority over my security guard job were dependent on businesses I now owned. But more than that, these connections gave me access to information about their professional lives that could prove useful in understanding the scope of their deception. The real estate company's property managers had detailed records of office lease agreements, including after-hours access logs and building security footage. The investment fund's analysts had prepared reports on the marketing firm's financial stability and employee performance metrics. I'd spent the afternoon reviewing these documents in a conference room at Whitman and Associates, piecing together a more complete picture of Lisa and Kevin's relationship. The office building's security logs showed that Kevin had been working late with unusual frequency over the past 6 months, often staying in the building until after midnight. More significantly, the logs showed that he'd been using his key card to access the building on weekends, when his consulting firm was officially closed. The marketing firm's employee reports were equally revealing. Lisa's productivity had improved dramatically over the past year, with several high-profile client presentations that had earned her recognition from senior management. But the improvement had coincided with her increased collaboration with an external consultant, who'd been hired to advise on strategic planning initiatives. The external consultant was Kevin. The pieces of their deception were falling into place with painful clarity. Kevin had used his position at the consulting firm to create professional opportunities for Lisa, helping her advance her career while building their personal relationship. She'd been telling the truth about working late and preparing important presentations, but she'd been omitting the crucial detail that Kevin was her collaborator, and increasingly her lover. They'd built their affair on a foundation of professional partnership, using business meetings and client presentations as legitimate cover for spending time together. The new client Lisa had mentioned wasn't fictional. It was a real account that Kevin's firm was pursuing, with Lisa serving as the liaison from the marketing company. The realization made their betrayal feel more calculated, more deliberate than I'd initially understood. This wasn't a spontaneous attraction that had overwhelmed their better judgment. It was a carefully planned relationship that had been developing for months, possibly years, with each professional collaboration strengthening their personal bond while distancing them from their obligations to me. That evening, I'd confronted the reality of my situation with newfound clarity. Lisa and Kevin weren't just having an affair, they were building a life together that excluded me entirely. The professional partnership was almost certainly leading towards something more permanent, possibly including plans for Lisa to leave her current job and join Kevin's firm directly. Which meant their current deception was temporary, a transition period while they arranged their personal and professional affairs to facilitate a permanent separation from me. Lisa's references to promotions and career advancement weren't just cover stories for their meetings, they were genuine discussions about their shared future. The question was whether I should continue gathering evidence of their betrayal, or accelerate my own timeline for confrontation. The inheritance gave me resources and options I hadn't possessed before, but it also gave me the luxury of patience. I could afford to wait, to let their plans develop fully, before revealing the extent of my knowledge and financial capabilities. But patience came with emotional costs. Each day of continued deception felt like another layer of betrayal, another demonstration that the woman I'd loved for 12 years had chosen my brother over our marriage. Each casual lie about working late or client meetings added to the catalog of cruelties I'd eventually need to address. I'd decided to give them one more week to reveal their intentions voluntarily. If Lisa continued the pretense of our marriage while building her future with Kevin, I'd force the confrontation on my terms, with full knowledge of their plans, and complete control over the financial and legal consequences of their choices. The irony wasn't lost on me that Harold's inheritance had given me the power to destroy both of their careers, while securing my own financial independence. Kevin's consulting firm depended on the office lease I now controlled. Lisa's marketing company relied on investment funding I could influence. Their professional success, which they'd been using to justify their superiority over my apparent failures, was built on foundations I could eliminate with a few phone calls. But revenge felt less satisfying than I'd expected. What I really wanted was acknowledgement that they'd been wrong about me, that their assessment of my worth and potential had been based on incomplete information and unfair assumptions. I wanted them to understand that their betrayal hadn't been justified by my circumstances, because those circumstances had been temporary, and largely irrelevant to my actual value as a person. The inheritance had given me something more valuable than money, the perspective to see that Lisa and Kevin's betrayal said more about their character than mine. They'd chosen deception over honesty, immediate gratification over long-term loyalty, and financial considerations over emotional integrity. Now I had the resources and information to ensure that those choices came with appropriate consequences. The moment of truth arrived on a Saturday evening when Lisa announced that Kevin had invited us both to dinner at Elevation, one of Denver's most exclusive restaurants. She delivered the invitation with barely contained excitement, explaining that Kevin wanted to celebrate some major professional news, and had specifically requested that both of us join him for what she described as a very important evening. The choice of restaurant was telling. Elevation required reservations weeks in advance, and charged prices that would have represented a significant financial strain on my security guard salary. Kevin was making a statement with this invitation, demonstrating his ability to afford luxuries that I supposedly could not, while positioning himself as the generous brother who could treat us to experiences beyond our normal reach. Lisa had spent hours preparing for the dinner, selecting and rejecting outfits with an attention to detail that she hadn't shown for our own anniversary dinner 6 months earlier. She'd finally settled on a navy blue dress that I'd never seen before, paired with jewelry that seemed far more expensive than anything in her usual collection. When I'd complimented the earrings, she'd dismissed my attention with a casual explanation about borrowing them from a colleague for the special occasion. The lies had become so routine for her that she barely seemed to register them anymore. Each fabrication rolled off her tongue with practiced ease, delivered with the confident tone of someone who'd grown comfortable with deception. The colleague who'd supposedly lent her the jewelry probably didn't exist, just like the demanding client who'd been requiring so many evening meetings recently. I'd chosen my own outfit carefully, selecting the newest items from my limited professional wardrobe, while making sure to maintain the appearance of someone who was trying his best with limited resources. The performance felt increasingly surreal, playing the role of the struggling husband, while possessing enough wealth to buy the restaurant where we'd be dining. Kevin was already seated when we arrived, positioned at a prime table with views of the city skyline that stretched across the downtown Denver landscape. He dressed for the occasion in what I recognized as a designer suit, the kind of outfit that cost more than I supposedly earned in several months. His smile when he saw us approach was broader than usual, charged with an energy that suggested tonight held special significance beyond a simple family dinner. "Rachel, Lisa, so glad you could make it," he said, standing to embrace each of us with enthusiasm that felt performative rather than genuine. When he hugged Lisa, I noticed the way his hand lingered on her back, the subtle intimacy of the gesture that would have been invisible to a casual observer, but felt obvious to someone who'd been watching for signs of their connection. "This place is incredible," Lisa said, settling into her chair with obvious pleasure. "Kevin, you really didn't need to go to such expense for us." "Nothing's too good for family," Kevin replied, his eyes meeting hers with a look that carried layers of meaning I was clearly supposed to miss. "Besides, tonight is special. I have some news that's going to change everything." The waiter appeared with menus and wine recommendations, and Kevin immediately ordered a bottle of champagne that cost more than my weekly grocery budget. The gesture was calculated to emphasize the disparity between our financial situations, a reminder that he could afford spontaneous luxuries, while I counted every dollar. "We're celebrating tonight," Kevin announced when the champagne arrived, raising his glass with ceremonial gravity. "To new opportunities and positive changes ahead." Lisa clinked her glass against his with enthusiasm that seemed disproportionate to his vague toast, suggesting she already knew what opportunities and changes he was referencing. I lifted my own glass mechanically, playing my role in their theater while wondering when they planned to reveal the true purpose of this dinner. The conversation during the first course was carefully choreographed, touching on safe topics like work pressures and local events while avoiding anything that might create tension or awkwardness. Kevin asked about my security job with the kind of sympathetic interest that felt condescending, inquiring whether I'd had any luck finding something more challenging or better compensated. "Actually, I've been thinking about making some changes," I said, choosing my words carefully. "There might be some new opportunities coming up that could be interesting." "That's great to hear," Kevin replied, though his tone suggested he didn't take my prospects very seriously. "It's never too late to reassess your career path and consider different directions." Lisa nodded enthusiastically, adding, "I've been encouraging Rachel to think bigger, to consider what he really wants to achieve long term. Sometimes we get stuck in patterns that aren't serving us well." The irony of her statement was breathtaking. She was lecturing me about being stuck in patterns while conducting a months-long affair that she believed I was too oblivious to notice. The patterns that weren't serving me well included trusting my wife and assuming my brother had my best interests at heart. Kevin leaned forward slightly, his expression becoming more serious as he prepared to transition the conversation toward his real agenda. "Actually, that's related to why I wanted us all to get together tonight. I have some news that I think will affect both of you, and I wanted to share it in person rather than over the phone." Lisa's hand moved to touch his arm briefly, a gesture of support that confirmed she already knew what he was about to announce. They'd clearly rehearsed this moment, planning how to present their news in a way that would minimize immediate conflict while achieving their desired outcome. "I've been offered a partnership opportunity with a consulting firm in San Francisco," Kevin continued, his voice taking on the tone of someone delivering momentous news. "It's an incredible chance to advance my career and establish myself on the West Coast market. The financial prospects are exceptional, far beyond anything I could achieve staying in Denver." He paused, allowing the implications to settle while watching my face for reactions. The job opportunity was probably real, but it was clearly connected to larger plans that involved Lisa in ways he wasn't yet ready to make explicit. That's amazing, I said, injecting appropriate enthusiasm into my voice. San Francisco must offer a lot of opportunities in your field. When would this start? That's the challenging part, Kevin replied, glancing at Lisa before continuing. They want me to relocate within 6 weeks. It's a fast timeline, but the opportunity is too good to pass up. The signing bonus alone would cover all moving expenses and provide a substantial foundation for getting established there. Lisa was nodding along with his explanation, her expression carefully balanced between excitement for his opportunity and concern about the family implications of his departure. But there was something rehearsed about her reaction, as if she'd already processed these details and was now performing surprise for my benefit. 6 weeks is soon, Lisa said thoughtfully. But you're right that some opportunities can't wait. You have to be willing to take risks when the potential rewards are significant enough. The conversation continued through the main course, with Kevin providing more details about his San Francisco opportunity, while Lisa asked questions that demonstrated surprising knowledge about consulting firm partnerships and West Coast market conditions. Their exchange felt too informed, too comfortable, like a discussion they'd had multiple times before, rather than news being shared for the first time. I found myself studying their body language more carefully as the evening progressed. The way Kevin's eyes kept returning to Lisa throughout his explanations. The subtle nods of encouragement she gave him when he discussed the financial benefits of the partnership. The shared glances that suggested private conversations and mutual understanding about plans I wasn't privy to. When the dessert course arrived, Kevin's demeanor shifted again, becoming more personal and emotionally charged. There's another aspect of this opportunity that I want to discuss with both of you. The firm I'll be joining specializes in marketing strategy and brand development, which means they need experienced professionals who understand client relationship management. He looked directly at Lisa as he continued. They've expressed interest in potentially bringing on additional team members who could contribute to their expansion plans. Lisa, your background in marketing and your success with client presentations would make you an ideal candidate for this kind of role. Lisa's face lit up with what appeared to be genuine surprise and excitement, though I suspected this job possibility had been discussed extensively in their private meetings. Really, they'd consider someone with my experience level for a position in San Francisco? More than consider, Kevin replied enthusiastically. I've already shared some of your recent work with them, and they're impressed with your strategic thinking and client management skills. The position would offer significantly better compensation than your current job, plus relocation assistance and partnership track potential. The pieces of their plan were finally becoming clear. Kevin's job opportunity in San Francisco wasn't just a career advancement, it was the foundation for a new life together that would geographically separate them from the complications of their current deception. Lisa's enthusiastic response to the job possibility revealed that they'd been planning this escape route for weeks, maybe months. That sounds incredible, Lisa said, turning to me with what I now recognized as carefully manufactured concern. But it would mean leaving Denver, leaving everything we've built here. Rachel, what do you think about something like that? The question was a masterpiece of manipulation, phrased to make me feel included in the decision while actually presenting me with a fait accompli. They'd already decided that Lisa would take the San Francisco position, but they needed me to either support the plan voluntarily or object in a way that would justify her departure as my failure to support her career advancement. It sounds like an amazing opportunity for you, I replied carefully. Life-changing, really. You'd have to be crazy not to at least explore it seriously. Kevin nodded approvingly, pleased that I was responding as they'd hoped. The timeline would be challenging, but if Lisa is interested, I could arrange for her to interview with the firm's partners within the next 2 weeks. They're eager to fill the position quickly, especially with someone who comes with a strong recommendation. Lisa looked at me with an expression that mixed excitement with what appeared to be genuine uncertainty. It would mean starting over in a completely new city, building new professional relationships, adapting to a different market. That's exciting but also intimidating. You'd have Kevin there to help with the transition, I pointed out, curious to see how they'd handle this obvious aspect of their arrangement. Having family nearby would make the adjustment much easier. Absolutely, Kevin agreed quickly. I'd do everything possible to help Lisa get established and succeed in the new role. We've always been a close family, and that support system would be crucial in a major life change like this. The euphemisms they were using to describe their affair were almost admirable in their creativity. Kevin's willingness to help Lisa get established was actually his promise to support her as his romantic partner. The close family relationship he referenced was code for the intimate connection they'd been developing over months of deception. Lisa was studying my face intently, trying to gauge my reaction to their carefully orchestrated presentation. "What would you think about a move like that, Rachel? Would you consider relocating to San Francisco if this opportunity worked out for me?" The question was the crucial test of their plan. If I expressed enthusiasm about moving to San Francisco, they'd need to find other reasons to exclude me from their new life together. If I objected to the relocation, they could position my resistance as evidence that I was holding Lisa back from achieving her potential. "I think you should pursue any opportunity that excites you and offers genuine advancement," I said, maintaining careful neutrality. "My situation is more flexible than yours. Security positions are available everywhere, so geography isn't really a constraint for me." Kevin's expression tightened slightly at my response, suggesting this wasn't the reaction they'd anticipated. They'd probably expected me to either object to the move or express anxiety about finding comparable work in a more expensive city. My calm acceptance of the possibility created complications for whatever exit strategy they'd planned. "Of course there are practical considerations," Lisa said, trying a different approach. "San Francisco is incredibly expensive, and we'd need to think carefully about whether we could afford the lifestyle change on uncertain income." She was giving me an opening to express financial concerns that would justify her eventual decision to move without me. The expensive lifestyle in San Francisco would be beyond the reach of a security guard's salary, making my presence there economically impractical even if I wanted to relocate. "Money is always a consideration," I agreed. "But some opportunities are worth financial risks if the long-term potential justifies the initial investment." Kevin leaned back in his chair, clearly frustrated that their carefully planned conversation wasn't proceeding as they'd expected. My responses were too supportive, too understanding, too accommodating to provide them with the conflict they needed to justify their predetermined decisions. "Well, it's still early in the process," Kevin said, signaling the waiter for the check. "Lisa would need to interview successfully before any of this becomes a real decision, but I wanted both of you to know about the possibility so we could start thinking through the implications." As Kevin paid the substantial dinner bill without hesitation, I realized this evening had been designed as a dress rehearsal for the conversation where they'd announce Lisa's decision to leave me for a new life in San Francisco with Kevin. They'd wanted to test my reactions, gauge my likely responses, and identify the most effective arguments for presenting their betrayal as a career opportunity that I was either too unsupportive or too financially limited to accommodate. But my calm acceptance of their scenario had disrupted their script. They'd prepared for anger, jealousy, financial anxiety, or emotional manipulation. They hadn't prepared for understanding support that removed their justifications for excluding me from their plans. The drive home was quiet, with Lisa lost in what appeared to be deep thought about the evening's revelations. I could practically see her recalculating their approach, trying to figure out how to proceed when their carefully planned presentation hadn't achieved the desired outcome. "Kevin's opportunity really is incredible," she said finally, breaking the silence as we pulled into our driveway. "And the possibility of a position for me is more than I ever expected." "You should definitely pursue it," I replied. "Opportunities like this don't come along often, and you've earned the chance to see how far your career can go." She looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite interpret, something between gratitude and confusion and what might have been guilt. "You'd really be supportive of something that major, even if it meant significant changes for both of us?" The question felt like a final test, one last chance for me to provide the resistance or limitations they needed to justify their planned betrayal. But I was done playing their game according to their rules. Tomorrow I would begin revealing the true scope of my knowledge and capabilities. Tonight I would let them believe their deception was still working. "I want you to be happy and successful," I said, and meant it more than they could possibly understand. "Whatever that requires, we'll figure it out together." But as I lay awake that night, listening to Lisa's breathing beside me, I knew that figuring it out together was the last thing they actually wanted. Their plan required my cooperation and my own betrayal, my voluntary agreement to be left behind while they started their new life together. They'd underestimated me in every possible way, and tomorrow they'd begin learning exactly how wrong they'd been. The confrontation began at precisely 8 o'clock on a Tuesday morning, when I called Kevin's office and requested an immediate meeting to discuss urgent matters related to his building lease. I'd spent the previous night finalizing my strategy with Harold's legal team, ensuring that every revelation would be backed by documentation and every consequence would be legally enforceable. Kevin's assistant had tried to schedule the meeting for later in the week, but I'd insisted on the urgency, explaining that there were time-sensitive issues related to his lease agreement that required immediate attention. The tone of authority I'd used was unfamiliar even to me, but it had achieved the desired result. Kevin would see me in his office at 9:30, giving me just enough time to prepare the final elements of my plan. Lisa had left for work that morning with unusual energy, humming while she prepared her coffee and spending extra time selecting her outfit. She'd mentioned that Kevin had arranged for her to have a preliminary phone interview with the San Francisco consulting firm that afternoon, the first step toward what they believed would be their escape from the complications of their current deception. "I'm nervous but excited," she'd said, adjusting her hair in the hallway mirror. "This could really be the beginning of something amazing." I'd agreed wholeheartedly, knowing that it would indeed be the beginning of something, though not what she expected. Today would mark the end of their carefully constructed lies, and the beginning of consequences they'd never anticipated. The drive to Kevin's office building felt different now that I knew I owned it. Instead of the imposing corporate structure that had always made me feel slightly intimidated, it was simply another asset in my portfolio, a piece of property that generated steady rental income and housed businesses that operated at my discretion. I'd arranged to meet with the building's property manager 30 minutes before my appointment with Kevin, ostensibly to review maintenance schedules but actually to ensure that certain security protocols would be in place for what was about to unfold. The manager, a competent woman named Patricia, who'd been running the building operations for Harold's company for over a decade, had been briefed on my inheritance and had quickly adapted to taking direction from the building's new owner. "The conference room is prepared as you requested," Patricia informed me as I signed the temporary visitor passes that would give Harold's legal team access to the building. "Security cameras are recording, and the audio system is functioning properly. Are you certain you want to proceed with this approach rather than handling matters privately?" I'd considered conducting the confrontation in private, but Kevin and Lisa's deception had been so elaborate and calculated that I wanted their exposure to be equally comprehensive. They'd planned to humiliate me with their departure, positioning my supposed failures as justification for their betrayal. They deserved to have their own failures documented with the same attention to detail they'd used in planning their deception. "I'm certain," I replied, checking my watch and noting that the legal team would arrive in 15 minutes. Some lessons are most effective when they're learned publicly. Kevin's office was located on the 12th floor, in a suite that I now knew cost his consulting firm nearly $8,000 per month in rent and utilities. The space was impressive, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering views of downtown Denver and expensive furniture that projected success and prosperity. Kevin had built his professional identity around the appearance of wealth and influence, using his office environment to intimidate clients and competitors alike. His assistant announced my arrival with the professional courtesy reserved for unexpected but apparently important visitors. Kevin emerged from his private office looking slightly puzzled but maintaining his usual confident demeanor. He was dressed in another designer suit, his appearance polished and authoritative, clearly prepared for what he assumed would be a routine discussion about building maintenance or lease renewal. "Rachel, good to see you," he said, extending his hand with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "I have to admit, I was surprised by your call. Building lease issues aren't usually handled by individual tenants, are they?" "Actually, they're often handled directly by property owners," I replied, accepting his handshake while noting the slight confusion that crossed his face. "Especially when the issues involve significant changes to existing agreements." Kevin led me into his office, gesturing toward the seating area near the windows where he usually conducted client meetings. The space was designed to impress, with leather furniture and carefully selected artwork that suggested both sophistication and success. I'd sat in similar chairs during our family gatherings when Kevin had occasionally brought work discussions into social settings, always feeling slightly out of place among the expensive furnishings. "Can I offer you coffee or water?" Kevin asked, settling into his chair with the relaxed confidence of someone conducting business on his own territory. "And please help me understand what lease issues you're concerned about. Are there problems with the building's maintenance or security that I should know about?" There are no problems with maintenance or security, I said, accepting the coffee while mentally noting that Kevin's expensive espresso machine was about to become significantly less affordable for him. The issues I need to discuss relate to unauthorized use of office space and potential violations of lease agreements that could result in immediate termination. Kevin's expression shifted slightly, though he maintained his professional composure. I'm not sure I understand what you're referring to. Our firm has always complied with all lease requirements, and we've never received any complaints about our use of the space. The complaints aren't about your firm's official business activities, I clarified, pulling out a folder containing security logs and building access records. They're about personal activities that have been conducted in these offices outside of normal business hours, activities that violate the lease agreement's restrictions on non-commercial use of the space. I watched Kevin's face carefully as the implications of my statement began to register. His confident smile wavered slightly, and he leaned forward in his chair with the focused attention of someone who'd suddenly realized this conversation was more serious than he'd anticipated. I'm still not sure what specific activities you're referring to, Kevin said, his tone becoming more cautious. Could you be more specific about these alleged violations? Instead of answering directly, I opened the folder and began placing documents on the coffee table between us. Security logs showing Kevin's after-hours access to the building. Photographs from building surveillance cameras showing Lisa entering the premises during times when the consulting firm was officially closed. Detailed records of weekend visits that had no connection to any business activities. These logs show that you've been using your office space for personal meetings that violate the commercial lease agreement, I explained, watching Kevin's face grow increasingly pale as he reviewed the evidence. More specifically, you've been conducting an extramarital affair with my wife using office space that you lease for professional purposes only. The silence that followed was profound. Kevin stared at the documents spread across the table, his mouth opening and closing without producing any sound. The confident professional persona he'd maintained throughout our conversation crumbled in the span of seconds, replaced by the panicked expression of someone who'd been caught in a deception they'd believed was undetectable. Rachel, I think there's been some kind of misunderstanding, Kevin finally managed, his voice noticeably shakier than before. These records might show that Lisa visited the office, but that doesn't mean what you're suggesting. We've been working on professional projects together, collaborating on presentations and strategic planning initiatives. I pulled out my phone and opened the photo album I'd prepared specifically for this moment. Images of Kevin and Lisa in intimate embraces at Pine Grove Bistro. Screenshots of text messages between them that Patricia had obtained through the building's Wi-Fi logs. Security footage from the office building showing them engaged in activities that were clearly personal rather than professional. Professional collaboration, I repeated, sliding the phone across the table so Kevin could see the images clearly. Is that what you'd call what's happening in these photographs? Kevin's face went completely white as he scrolled through the evidence of his affair with Lisa. Each image was a nail in the coffin of his denials, each piece of documentation proof that their deception had been far more comprehensive than they'd realized. How did you get these?
Kevin asked, his voice barely above a whisper. How long have you known? I've known for several weeks, I replied calmly. Long enough to document the scope of your betrayal and prepare appropriate responses to your deception. Before Kevin could respond, there was a knock on his office door. His assistant announced that there were visitors here to see him, representatives from the building management company who needed to discuss urgent lease matters. Kevin looked at me with growing alarm, beginning to understand that this confrontation had been carefully planned and that his situation was about to become significantly worse. The legal team from Whitman and Associates entered the office with professional authority, carrying briefcases and wearing the kind of expensive suits that suggested serious legal business. Patricia accompanied them, along with two representatives from the property management company who I'd arranged to witness the proceedings. Kevin Thompson, said the lead attorney, a distinguished man in his 60s who'd been handling Harold's affairs for over 20 years. I'm James Whitman from Whitman and Associates. I'm here to inform you that your lease agreement for this office space is being terminated immediately due to violations of the commercial use restrictions. Kevin looked from the legal team to me with mounting panic. I don't understand. What violations? And what does Rachel have to do with any of this? Mr. Thompson is here because he's the new owner of this building, Patricia explained, her tone professionally neutral. The property was transferred to him as part of an inheritance settlement 6 weeks ago. As the new owner, he has the authority to enforce lease agreements and terminate tenancies that violate the terms of their contracts. The revelation hit Kevin like a physical blow. He sagged back in his chair, staring at me with an expression of complete disbelief. You own this building? That's impossible. You're a security guard. You can't afford to own a building like this. Actually, I own several buildings like this, I said, allowing myself a slight smile at his shock. Along with a number of other properties and business interests that you're apparently unaware of. The security guard job was a choice, not a necessity. James Whitman opened his briefcase and removed a thick stack of legal documents. Mr. Thompson, these papers detail the terms of your lease termination and the financial consequences of violating the commercial use restrictions. You have 72 hours to vacate these premises and settle all outstanding obligations related to your tenancy. Kevin was reading through the lease termination documents with growing horror, beginning to understand the financial implications of losing his office space with no advance notice. His consulting firm depended on the prestigious downtown location to attract high-end clients, and finding comparable space would be both expensive and time-consuming. This is insane, Kevin said, his voice rising with desperation. You can't terminate my lease because of personal problems between us. There have to be legal protections against this kind of retaliation. There are legal protections against arbitrary lease termination, Whitman agreed. However, those protections don't apply when tenants violate the specific terms of their agreements. Your lease clearly prohibits using the office space for personal activities unrelated to your business operations. The evidence we've gathered demonstrates multiple violations of this restriction over a period of several months. I stood up and walked to Kevin's desk, where several framed photographs showed him receiving awards and recognition from his consulting firm. There's more you should know about your professional situation. The consulting firm where you work is currently seeking a significant loan to expand their West Coast operations. That loan application is being reviewed by an investment group that I happen to have a controlling interest in. Kevin's face went from white to gray as the implications of this revelation sank in. The San Francisco partnership opportunity depends on securing adequate funding for the expansion, I confirmed, which depends on the investment group's assessment of the firm's stability and the reliability of its key personnel. I imagine having one of their senior consultants involved in a messy personal scandal while facing lease termination for professional misconduct might affect their evaluation of the firm's prospects. The legal team was packing up their documents, having delivered the lease termination notice and completed their official business. Before leaving, Whitman handed Kevin a business card and additional paperwork. These documents detail the civil liability you may face for using leased commercial space for unauthorized personal activities. Whitman explained, the building owner is entitled to seek damages for any decrease in property value or rental income resulting from your violations. You'll want to consult with your own attorney to understand your exposure. After the legal team departed, Kevin and I were alone in his office once again. The expensive furniture and impressive views suddenly felt like artifacts from someone else's life, reminders of a professional status that was rapidly evaporating. How is this possible? Kevin asked, his voice barely audible. How can you own all these businesses and properties? Where did the money come from? Uncle Harold left me his estate, I explained simply. $8.7 million, plus controlling interests in various business ventures throughout Colorado and Montana. The uncle you barely remembered, who apparently had been following my situation more closely than any of us realized. Kevin buried his face in his hands, finally understanding the magnitude of his miscalculation. Lisa doesn't know about any of this. Lisa doesn't know about the inheritance, and she doesn't know that I've been aware of your affair for weeks, I confirmed. She's probably preparing for her phone interview with the San Francisco consulting firm right now, excited about the opportunity to start a new life with you on the West Coast. The San Francisco opportunity, Kevin repeated hollowly. That was dependent on the expansion funding, which is dependent on my investment group's approval, I finished. And I think you can imagine how I'm inclined to vote on that particular funding request. My phone rang, displaying Lisa's number. I answered with the cheerful tone of a supportive husband, aware that Kevin was listening to every word of the conversation. Hi honey, how's your day going? Rachel, I have incredible news. Lisa's voice bubbled with excitement through the phone's speaker. I just finished the phone interview with the San Francisco firm, and they want to bring me out there next week for in-person meetings. Kevin was right about this being an amazing opportunity. That's wonderful, I replied, maintaining my supportive tone while watching Kevin's face crumble. I'm sure Kevin is thrilled that his recommendation worked out so well for you. He is. We're supposed to meet for coffee this afternoon to discuss the next steps and talk about logistics for the West Coast move. I know this is all happening quickly, but I think this could really be the beginning of something special. I'm sure it will be, I agreed. The beginning of something very different from what you're expecting. After ending the call, I turned back to Kevin, who was staring at his phone with the expression of someone who'd realized his entire world was collapsing. You're going to tell her, Kevin said. It wasn't a question. I'm going to give both of you the opportunity to tell me, I corrected. This afternoon, when you meet for coffee to discuss your West Coast plans, I'll be joining you. You can explain your relationship honestly, or I can present the evidence I've gathered and let Lisa draw her own conclusions. Rachel, please, you have to understand that we never meant for this to happen. It just developed naturally over time, and we've been trying to find a way to handle the situation that wouldn't hurt you unnecessarily. You've been trying to find a way to abandon me while making it seem like my fault, I corrected. You've been using my supposed financial failures as justification for your betrayal, when those failures were entirely fictional. I gathered the documents from the coffee table and returned them to my folder. The coffee meeting Lisa mentioned is at 3 o'clock at Central Perk, isn't it? The same place where you've been meeting regularly for the past 2 months. Kevin nodded miserably, no longer attempting to deny the extent of his deception. I'll see you both there, I said, heading toward his office door. And Kevin, you might want to use the next few hours to consider whether you'd prefer to tell Lisa the truth about your situation, or whether you'd like me to explain how her lover is about to lose his job, his office, and his financial stability all in the same week. The meeting at Central Perk that afternoon was everything I'd anticipated and more. Lisa arrived first, practically glowing with excitement about her San Francisco interview and the prospects for her new life with Kevin. She'd chosen a corner table with privacy for their discussion, clearly intending to finalize plans for their betrayal while maintaining the fiction of their professional collaboration. Kevin arrived 10 minutes later, looking haggard and defeated. The confident, successful consultant who'd been flaunting his prosperity just hours earlier had been replaced by someone who appeared to be struggling with the weight of multiple disasters descending simultaneously. Kevin, you look terrible, Lisa said, reaching across the table to touch his hand with obvious concern. Are you feeling all right? I thought you'd be excited about how well the interview went. There have been some complications, Kevin began, his voice strained. Some problems with the San Francisco opportunity that I need to explain. I chose that moment to approach their table, carrying a coffee and wearing the same security guard uniform that had become a symbol of my supposed failure. Lisa's face lit up with surprise and pleasure at seeing me, clearly delighted by what she assumed was a coincidental encounter. Rachel, what a surprise, she said, standing to hug me with the affectionate enthusiasm of someone who believed her deception was still intact. I was just telling Kevin about the amazing interview I had today. The San Francisco firm is even more impressive than he described. I'm sure it is, I replied, taking the empty chair at their table without waiting for an invitation. Kevin was just about to explain some complications with the opportunity, weren't you? Kevin looked at me with pleading eyes, clearly hoping I might allow him to control the narrative of their exposure. But the time for managing the situation on their terms had passed the moment they decided to build their relationship on a foundation of lies and betrayal. Actually, I continued, pulling out my phone and opening the photo album I'd prepared, I think I should explain the complications myself. I placed the phone on the table, displaying the image of Kevin and Lisa kissing at Pine Grove Bistro. Lisa's face went completely white as she stared at the screen, her mouth opening in shock and recognition. Rachel, I can explain, she began, but I held up my hand to stop her. No explanation necessary, I said calmly. I've been aware of your affair for several weeks. I've been documenting your meetings, recording your conversations, and preparing for this moment when you'd finally reveal your plans to abandon our marriage for a new life with my brother. Lisa looked from me to Kevin with growing panic, beginning to understand that their carefully planned deception had been exposed and that their situation was far more precarious than they'd realized. But I have more complicated news than just your affair, I continued, sliding additional documents across the table. Kevin's San Francisco opportunity has been canceled due to funding issues. His office lease has been terminated due to policy violations, and his consulting firm is facing serious financial difficulties that will likely result in significant staff reductions. That's impossible, Lisa said, turning to Kevin for reassurance. The interview went perfectly. They're expecting me in San Francisco next week for final meetings. The funding for the firm's expansion has been denied, Kevin said quietly, his voice barely audible. Without that investment, there won't be any West Coast positions available. But you said it was guaranteed, Lisa protested, her voice rising with confusion and anger. You said the partnership was already approved and that my position was secure. I thought it was, Kevin replied miserably. I didn't know that the investment decision would be made by Rachel. Lisa stared at Kevin in complete bewilderment, then turned to me with an expression of growing alarm. What does he mean, the investment decision would be made by you? Rachel, what's going on here? I opened my briefcase and removed the documents from Harold's estate, spreading them across the table so Lisa could see the scope of what she'd been unaware of throughout our marriage. Uncle Harold left me his entire estate, I explained calmly. $8.7 million, plus controlling interests in various businesses including the investment group that Kevin's firm applied to for expansion funding. I own the building where Kevin's office is located, and I have influence over the marketing firm where you work. Lisa's face cycled through multiple expressions as she processed this information: disbelief, shock, confusion, and finally a dawning understanding of how completely she'd misjudged our situation. You're a millionaire, she whispered, staring at the legal documents that proved my wealth. All this time when we were struggling with bills and talking about money problems, you were actually wealthy. I became wealthy 6 weeks ago, I clarified. But I chose not to reveal the inheritance immediately, because I wanted to see how you'd handle our marriage when you believed I was financially limited. The answer, apparently, was that you'd have an affair with my brother, and planned to abandon me for someone you perceived as more successful. The coffee shop had grown quiet around us, other patrons sensing the drama unfolding at our table, but unable to hear the specific details of our conversation. Lisa and Kevin sat in stunned silence, processing the complete reversal of everything they'd believed about our respective situations. The affair wasn't about money, Lisa said finally, though her voice lacked conviction. It was about connection and compatibility, and shared goals for the future. Shared goals like escaping from your marriage to a man you considered a failure, I replied. Shared goals like building a new life in San Francisco funded by opportunities that depended on my financial decisions. Kevin found his voice, though it remained shaky and uncertain. Rachel, we never meant to hurt you. We were trying to find a way to handle the situation that would be fair to everyone involved. Fair would have been honesty, I said simply. Fair would have been discussing problems in our marriage directly rather than conducting secret affairs. Fair would have been recognizing that my worth as a person isn't determined by my job title or bank account balance. I stood up from the table, gathering my documents and preparing to leave them with the consequences of their choices. You both made decisions based on incomplete information and false assumptions. Now you can live with the results of those decisions. Rachel, wait, Lisa called out, reaching for my arm as I prepared to leave. What happens now? Where does this leave us? It leaves you free to pursue whatever relationship makes you happy, I replied. Without the complications of deceiving a husband who apparently wasn't worth your honesty or loyalty. I left them sitting at the table, surrounded by the evidence of their betrayal, and the documentation of their spectacular miscalculation. The future they'd planned together had evaporated in the span of a single afternoon, replaced by the reality that their deception had been both unnecessary and catastrophically expensive. 6 months later, I received word that Lisa had moved back in with her parents after losing her job, when the marketing firm downsized due to reduced investment funding. Kevin had relocated to Phoenix, where he'd found work with a smaller consulting firm at a significantly reduced salary. They were no longer together, their relationship having collapsed under the pressure of their shared professional and financial disasters. As for me, I'd used Harold's inheritance to establish a foundation focused on supporting people facing career transitions and financial difficulties. The same challenges I'd believed I was facing when Lisa and Kevin had decided I wasn't worth their loyalty. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was now helping others navigate the kind of struggles that had led to the destruction of my marriage. I never remarried, though I dated occasionally and maintained friendships with people who valued honesty and integrity over financial status. The inheritance had given me many things: security, options, influence, and comfort. But the most valuable gift had been clarity about what really mattered in relationships and what kind of person I wanted to be when faced with both wealth and betrayal. Harold's letter had been right about money changing how people see you, but he'd been even more right about the importance of figuring out who you really are before letting wealth change your relationship. I'd learned that lesson the hard way. but I'd learned it completely. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.